Thank y'all for joining me tonight for Unity Bay Area Houston's next relevant conversation, pollution and our power to fix it. We're going to be talking about a lot of different things tonight, but primarily we are going to be focusing on the biggest source of pollutions, why they are harmful, and what we can do as ordinary citizens to fix these problems, both on a personal level in making lifestyle adjustments, and on a large scale, making effective changes in our government. Now, I also recognize that many people in our ministry are very environmentally conscious already. They've already maybe made a lot of these changes. And if that's you, congratulations, you are ahead of the game. I might still touch on a few things you've already heard of, but in talking about some of the ways that we can influence our government, I hope I will share new information that we can take into our communities to make lasting, effective change to pollution. So first of all, why fix pollution? Well, even though human beings may draw borders and boundaries, nature doesn't recognize any of these borders and boundaries. It runs uninterrupted from county to county, state to state, coast to coast, sea to shining sea, encompassing everyone and everything on this miraculous planet we call Earth. Pollution anywhere doesn't necessarily stay in that area. And right now, it threatens the health of our shared environment and our personal health too. We need all hands on deck, which is why I'm not only going to talk about what you can do to make a difference, but also how to involve other people who may not be as keen on environmental conservation as we are. Let's start with air pollution, which is the worst source of pollution, but also because it is the worst, it provides the biggest opportunity for progress. Air pollution, bad outdoor air in 2016 caused an estimated 4.2 million premature deaths worldwide, according to the World Health Organization. It has been linked to higher rates of cancer, heart disease, stroke, and respiratory diseases such as asthma. In fact, if you look at where asthma crops up around the country, you'll notice it is at a much higher concentration around chemical factories. And in the US, nearly 134 million people are at risk of disease and premature death due to air pollution, according to estimates from the American Lung Association. Cutting back on pollution literally saves lives. And this is one of the emphases that I take when I go to speak to politicians in DC, when I've lobbied Congress for environmental change and climate change legislation, because I personally care about polar bears and their shrinking habitat. But I know that a lot of the people that I'm speaking to do not care as much about that as I do. And if they do, they often still have to focus on what their constituents and what their voters want. So when we make pollution and solving pollution about saving human lives, we can save the polar bears and help the environment, and while making it about something that really touches the hearts and minds of people across America who may not otherwise care about the environmental reasons that we care about. Cutting back on pollution literally saves lives. Air pollution also contributes to climate change. Heat waves, extreme weather, food supply disruptions, and other effects related to increased greenhouse gases have negative impacts on human health. The 2018 U.S. Fourth National Climate Assessment noted that a changing climate could, quote, expose more people in North America to ticks carrying Lyme disease and mosquitoes that transmit viruses such as West Nile and Zika. I am pretty young and I haven't been involved in environmental activism as long as some of you may have. I also remember a time when Houston didn't have a 1,000-year flood every other year. Extreme weather is not only serious weather, it is unpredictable weather. It is weather that, because we can't predict it, we aren't as well prepared for it. And it is one of the reasons why the Pentagon has rated climate change as the single greatest national security threat to America, because they call it a threat multiplier, meaning that if you want to deploy some troops in, let's say, a desert climate like Afghanistan, and you have to supply them with water, if it's hotter, you have to supply them with more resources to keep them healthy and safe. And those costs add up. Additionally, as we know from Hurricane Harvey hitting Houston, Texas, there is profound economic damage and costs associated with not tackling climate change, which is primarily caused from carbon pollution. In the United States, decades of regulation has led to air quality far better than in most of the world. In New York City, for example, PM 2.5 levels, which stands for particulate matter under smaller than 2.5 millimeters, fell 30% from 2009 to 2017, and that saved many lives. I want to emphasize that as depressing as climate change and pollution and environmental destruction can be, we have made significant progress. We really have. And that's important to note, because if we feel like we haven't really made a huge difference, then we aren't as motivated to continue making a difference, because we feel like, what's the point? So throughout this talk, I'm also going to bring up a bunch of instances in which we've done really, really well to restore our environment and tackle these climate change problems. Even so, even with the progress we have made, air pollution still kills more than 100,000 Americans every single year. Carbon pollution is the biggest source of pollution, so it's the one that we can find the biggest benefit for fixing. So how much carbon pollution is there? Now, we might think that carbon pollution goes into the air and remains in the air because it comes out in a gaseous form. However, it also ends up in our oceans. Between 2008 to 2017, we've dumped into our atmosphere almost 40 gigatons of emissions of heat-trapping gases every single year from burning fossil fuels and land use change. Now, how much is a gigaton? A gigaton is 1 billion tons, but even that is kind of hard to wrap our heads around because it's just more than we can possibly conceive of. So I found this picture online that shows exactly how much one single gigaton is. Laid on top of New York City, it all but swallows the Empire State Building and more than swallows many of the buildings around it. So take this visual, and if you can, try to mentally replicate it on different portions of the city, times 40. And that is how much we put into the atmosphere every single year. Carbon pollution changes the ocean's chemistry, slowing its ability to uptake carbon dioxide, making it more acidic and harming shellfish and other marine life that we depend on for food. Now, there's a couple of things to unpack here. One of them is that it slows the ocean's ability to uptake CO2. We know that plants love carbon dioxide, whether they're on land or in the ocean, but even they have a limit to how much they can uptake. I think of it like the way that I can eat a bunch of brownies. I love brownies. And I can eat 1, 2, honestly, I can eat a whole tray just by myself. But there comes a time where I can't eat any more brownies no matter how much I want to. If somebody tries to force feed me 1 gigaton of brownies, I will try to eat it all, but I'm not going to be able to. And at some point, when I feel myself starting to become more full, I'm going to start slowing down how many brownies I intake. And our oceans are the same way. They like to soak up carbon dioxide, but even they have a limit. And too much makes them acidic and harms shellfish and other marine life that we depend on for food, which creates then not only a food shortage, but also millions of dollars of damage to the shellfish industry. It's estimated that if we don't solve the carbon pollution and the acidification of the oceans, it could cost the shellfish industry literally hundreds of millions of dollars in damages. And by the end of the century, ocean surface waters could be more than twice as acidic as they were at the end of the last century if we don't reduce our carbon emissions. However, there is hope for our oceans. One of the things that usually gets me down the most when I hear about ocean acidification is watching these beautiful, colorful coral reefs turn into these stark white, bone-like graveyards. And yet divers on some parts of the coast have created coral nurseries where they grow coral on elevated concrete platforms in ideal conditions to later transplant back into dead coral communities to revitalize them. Furthermore, smarter management systems known as fishing rights are reversing incentives that lead to overfishing and environmental destruction. They do this by tying fishermen's interests to the long-term health of a fishery, so their income improves along with the fish population or declines along with the fish population going down. This is incredibly important, and I'll be returning to the same concept again and again throughout this talk. If we want to effect lasting and immediate change, we have to understand that people oftentimes have a lot on their plate already, and unless we can show that these changes will personally benefit them, they will put them off, or they won't prioritize them in the way that we need them to. So tying their interests to the long-term health of the environment is incredibly important to shifting the consciousness of the world around climate change and pollution. Now, carbon pollution in the air is particularly deadly because it sticks around in the atmosphere for decades to centuries, wreaking havoc the entire time. To have a sustained long-term effect on climate change up to 2100, nations would have to focus on carbon dioxide beginning immediately. This would limit warming to 2 degrees Celsius or 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit above pre-industrial levels by 2100. So what can we do about carbon pollution? The most important thing we can do is talk to our local representatives about staying in the Paris Climate Agreement. Now, I know the United States has pulled out of it on a national level. However, 25 states have vowed to stick with the program, hitting all the benchmarks and milestones along the way, including California, Colorado, New Mexico, and Pennsylvania. We can carpool when possible and use cruise control for long trips. We can turn off lights and fans when not using them. We can switch to hybrid or electric cars. We can use solar panels on our roofs. We can use LED lights, which use up to 85% less energy, last up to 25 times longer, and are cheaper to run than incandescent lights. And there we have, again, that economic incentive. When it comes to plastics, which we'll get into more later, we can recycle, reuse, repair, and repurpose, because the petrochemical industry responsible for making plastic puts off a lot of carbon emissions. So by tackling plastic, we can also tackle carbon emissions. Just make sure when you recycle that you look at those the little triangle of arrows wherever they are in the plastic to make sure the number inside is recyclable in your area. In our local area, in the League City kind of area, every number is recyclable except for number 6. Those ones, if you don't want to throw them out, you can reuse them. So for example, here are a couple interesting pictures I found online. Somebody reused and repurposed a bunch of plastic bottles and turned them into a vertical garden. In another one, they made a bunch of really cute piggy planters from plastic gallon jugs. They've got little smiley faces on there. They have their own little bow ties. I think it's super cute. Perhaps one of the most important things we could do, besides urging our local government to support the Paris Agreement on a local level, is by supporting the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, which is promoted by the Citizens Climate Lobby. Now, what this does is it reduces America's carbon emissions by 40% over the next 12 years, which is a good way to pump the brakes on carbon emissions, slowing down and mitigating the most severe effects of climate change. It places a fee, not a tax, on carbon emissions, which are then paid back to ordinary citizens as dividends, which especially helps low-income and middle-income Americans. Now, the government doesn't keep any of this money, which is what makes this bill so effective and gives it bipartisan support in the House and the Senate. I have seen a lot of climate bills that I liked over the years, but this is one of the best ones and one of my favorite ones. Partly, I admit I'm biased because I'm a member of the Citizens Climate Lobby, but also because it has support from Stanford, Yale, and a bunch of climate researchers who believe that this is one of the most effective climate bills that is also the most likely to be passed. I kid you not, if you look up the bipartisan support this bill has, you will be shocked at some of the people who support it. You'll be like, wait, that guy supports a climate bill? That guy's never supported a climate bill. Yes, that guy supports a climate bill. And it does this partially because it places a fee, not a tax, on carbon emissions. For some of the politicians that we will need to influence to make this lasting change, tax is a dirty word, and they don't want any of the government keeping the money. And their constituents who voted them into office don't want the government keeping any of the money. So this bill bypasses that by paying it right back to the individual. This bill and the organization who sponsors it also ties into unity values by not blaming, condemning, or vilifying anybody. It treats everybody as an ally, and inclusivity is one of its founding principles. Now, what about methane pollution? There are two huge sources of methane pollution, which is cow burps. I used to think it was cow farts. Turns out it's really mostly just burps, and fracking. Methane warms the planet 84 times as much as carbon dioxide over a 20-year period. It remains in the atmosphere for about 12 years. Now that's important to keep in mind because it is very, it's very potent, but 12 years remaining in the atmosphere is nowhere near as close to the centuries that carbon dioxide can remain in the environment. Still, most methane emissions come from human activities, which means since we are responsible, we are also capable of creating drastic change in that environment. And agriculture is one of the key emitting sectors, responsible for about 40%. Now there is a good reason for this, and that is because ruminants, such as sheep and cows, account for more than a third of total emissions from agriculture. And the average ruminant produces 250 to 500 liters of methane per day. So if you imagine walking into a Walmart or a Costco or wherever you happen to shop, and you imagine 250 to 500 liter soda bottles stacked on stacks on stacks, racks on racks on racks, and every single one of those bottles is filled with polluted air. Now imagine that somebody opens up all of those bottles every single day, 250 to 500 bottles of polluted air going in the environment. That is a single cow. And there are a lot of cows in the world. In fact, livestock are responsible for burping the methane equivalent of 3.1 gigatons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere every year. This affects human health, especially our respiratory system. It affects human health because it's a precursor of smog. And with health impacts included, the benefits of controlling methane outweigh the costs by at least 3 to 1, and in some cases by as much as 20 to 1. Now, there is hope for agricultural emissions. Cows have been given a vaccine against certain gut microbes responsible for producing methane as animals digest their food. This vaccine is still in production. It's still got a lot of kinks to work out, but hopefully it might allow us to continue eating meat and dairy products while lessening the impact livestock has on the environment. Now, personally, I think it would be great if we could mitigate it completely, if we could just get rid of all those emissions, but we need to take some other steps before we do that. So for example, I never thought I would see this in my lifetime, but we now have meatless meat, the Impossible Burger. It looks like meat, it smells like meat, it tastes like meat, apparently it even bleeds like meat, but unfortunately, it is still about twice the cost of a normal beef burger. Now, I might be able to afford that since I don't go out to get fast food that often, but if you're a low-income family who relies on fast food to feed your family, then at the end of the day, you're going to choose the more cost-effective option. But what this vaccine might be able to do is to mitigate some of the more damaging effects of methane emissions while technology reaches the point where this vaccine is more widespread. So if you think about a while ago, a computer used to used to take up an entire building. Now we have a little computer that fits in our pockets. So this vaccine could help with the more serious effects of methane emissions while the meatless meat becomes more available and cheaper to a wider demographic. Furthermore, selective breeding for animals that produce less methane is part of a wider breeding program to develop healthier and more efficient sheep and cows. Now, both these attributes also reduce greenhouse gases generated per unit of meat and milk, to the point where Eileen Wall, the head of research at Scotland's Royal College, says that over the past 20 years, they have been able to reduce the environmental footprint of meat and milk production in the UK by 20%. And this next one is one of my favorite ways to reduce methane emissions. University of California Davis researchers estimate that it might be possible to reduce global methane emissions from cows by 15% just by changing their diet. So the more fiber a cow eats, the more methane it produces. But adding legumes and various oils such as linseed and soya to their diet can be helpful. Turns out that better quality feeding makes animals more productive, and more productive animals produce less methane. Now, I love this because it treats the animals well. It doesn't do anything barbaric or cruel. It gives them a healthier diet, and in return, they help us. I think that it checks all the boxes of a humane, ethical, and effective way to combat methane emissions. Still, we can do things in our individual lives to combat methane emissions. So for example, we can eat less red meat or cut it out of our diet completely. Now, I know a lot of people in our ministry already do that. We have quite a few members who come to the vegetarian vegan potluck days, and they make some really, really tasty food. But I would say, from my personal experience, a couple of things, which is, if you want to cut out red meat in your diet, but you eat a lot of red meat, take it slow. Like if you, let's say, have ice cream every single day, if you try to replace that ice cream with an apple, because you know it's healthier that way, chances are you're not going to be nearly as effective as if you slowly phased out ice cream from your diet and replaced it with something else that you like. And we don't even have to transition away from red meat for entirely selfless reasons. I mean, I certainly don't. So for example, I eat less red meat, not just because I found out that the agricultural beef industry is a huge strain on the environment, but also because fish and chicken are much healthier for my body and my mind, and I, for one, would like to be a physically fit, mentally sharp old man way into the next century. So I have some selfish reasons for doing it. It's not, for me, all about the environment, but that's okay, so long as you reduce your red meat intake. You can also compost your food waste so it doesn't land in a landfill and emit methane that way. And we can also talk to people about the agricultural and economic benefits of sustainable agriculture. So just like that example with the fishing industry, when you tie the well-being of people's health and finances into improving the environment, they are much more likely to do it than if we were to demand they sacrifice something important to them in their lives and their identity for the sake of the environment. It's not that people are bad, and I certainly don't want you to walk away from this feeling guilty or guilting other people. That is the opposite of what I want. People have so much on their plates as it is that adding anything else onto that doesn't benefit can sometimes make them shut down and turn away and not as receptive to the message that we want them to hear. Okay, so what about fracking pollution? Fracking combines dangerous chemicals with large amounts of water and sand at high rates of pressure to create rock formations. And these formations are used to fracture material surrounding oil and gas, which enables them to be extracted. Research indicates the US oil and gas industry emits 13 million metric tons of methane every single year for a leak rate of 2.3% of all production. Here's a picture of how fracking works. They send all these chemicals down into the ground and they create fracking. Now you'll notice that there are plenty of times where it doesn't cause any kind of hazardous spills at all. But there are times where the cracks can reach into groundwater and contaminate it and make it undrinkable. Here is some fracking contaminated water. Not very tasty looking. It's not something that you'd want to drink. And in my research, I found that this has happened to a lot of people who were originally very, very excited to have fracking come to their town because it would provide jobs. But then it destroyed the environment near their homes. Their tap water is contaminated. Their clean drinking water is contaminated. And they no longer have enough money to move. So if I were to talk to people in Congress, let's say, who are resistant to hearing about fracking reform, and I say it hurts the environment, they might not listen. But if I say, here are some examples of hardworking citizens whose land is now contaminated, who are having a hard time, who are struggling with finding clean drinking water, then it tugs on the heartstrings a bit more, and it makes people much more receptive. So just how bad is fracking? Chemicals released at well sites can lead to health problems such as irritation of the eyes, the nose, the mouth, the throat. On a national and state level, fracking uses billions of gallons of water every single year. And on a local level, this consumption reduces the amount of fresh water available to nearby residents, particularly in areas where water availability is low. So think deserts and deserty areas like Nevada or Arizona. When water is not available to fracking sites locally, it may be transported from across other regions, ultimately drawing down the available water from lakes and rivers across the country. Furthermore, in some cases, hydraulic fracturing fluid has spilled into our surface water supplies, as you saw a moment ago with that man's contaminated drinking water, and the high salinity of wastewater spills can reduce the soil's ability to support plant life. Land-dwelling plants are not huge fans of salt. And the injection wells used in the storage of hydraulic fracturing wastewater can cause earthquakes. So you'd think that with all these possible, all these negatives that come along with fracking, we would get something really, really beneficial in return, which is what I thought when I first started doing research. It turns out that fracking is there's a lot of cons and not a lot of pros. To give you an example of just how damaging fracking can be, Pittsburgh, as part of Pennsylvania, is one of the states committed to following the Paris Climate Agreement. And yet fracking is so bad for the environment that construction of a single ethane cracker in Pittsburgh would completely negate the city's work to fight climate change for the next 10 years. Plus, this single ethane cracker requires 1,000 fully producing shale gas wells to feed it on an ongoing basis. This ethane cracker is very, very greedy. Shale gas wells also tend to quickly lose production capacity, meaning that more wells need to be drilled to keep the plant running. So it just takes and takes and takes, and it doesn't really give a lot back, especially in this current time in history when we have plenty of alternatives available. So what can we do about this? Well, fracking enjoys a number of loopholes from some of our bedrock environmental laws. For example, oil and gas waste is currently not considered hazardous waste under the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. So we can stop fracking by calling our elected representatives or going to town hall meetings and urge them to close these loopholes. If your state won't allow a complete fracking ban at the local level, or you're thinking about making some municipal action, but then you're worried it'll backfire, you can try pushing small-scale ideas at town meetings or with local representatives. So for example, in Texas, we are a huge we are very big in the oil gas industry, so it's not impossible that we could get a statewide ban on fracking. But it is probably more effective to start by banning fracking in residential areas within 5,000 feet of a school or near nature preserves and parks. If you want to go so far as to create actual ordinances, use specific language and tight terms so oil and gas companies can't find loopholes to slip through. Now, this code can be really difficult for non-professionals to crack, and I certainly consider myself a non-professional. I don't speak legalese very well, but the NRDC has developed the Community Fracking Defense Project, which provides legal advice at the local level, so ordinary folk like you and me who don't understand legalese very well can educate ourselves and be more effective when we talk to our representatives. We can also join anti-fracking organizations like Frack Dallas or Americans Against Fracking. Now, Frack Dallas makes it sound like it is limited to Dallas, and that is where it originated. However, they welcome people from all over the state and the country to participate in their community and to get involved in whatever way you want to get involved. Plastic pollution. This is the one that I heard about the most growing up. And here we can see a man swimming in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. This is a patch of floating, swirling plastic soup, some of it big, a lot of it very, very small, swirling in the Pacific Ocean. It is estimated to be twice the size of France. It's also estimated that if we don't do anything about it in the next 10 years, it will double in size. So how widespread is plastic pollution? Every day, approximately 8 million pieces of plastic pollution find their way into our oceans, which is the equivalent of setting 5 garbage bags full of trash on every foot of coastline around the world. There may now be around 5.25 trillion macro and microplastic pieces floating in the open ocean. Now, despite plastic being manufactured only within around the last 100 years, plastic consistently makes up to 60 to 90% of all marine debris studied. It can now be found on every beach in the world, from busy tourist beaches to uninhabited remote tropical islands to the top of Mount Everest and the bottom of the Mariana Trench. Literally the highest and the lowest point on Earth now has plastic. And scientists have recently discovered microplastics embedded deep in the Arctic ice, where we thought human influence had yet to reach. Consumer plastic production begins with drilling for oil and gas in Texas. Separating out the various natural gas liquids from one another, cracking the ethane to produce polyethylene along the Gulf Coast of Mexico, and shipping the plastic pellets to Asia to be processed into plastic wrap or packaging, and then that is shipped back to grocery stores in the United States. And when that plastic reaches consumers, it is often used only once, an estimated 12 minutes, and then discarded in a matter of minutes or seconds. For this very high rate of production and very low rate of use, the climate impact is huge. Carbon dioxide emissions from the petrochemical sector are expected to rise by 20% through 2030, according to the International Energy Agency. Now, I know this can seem like doom and gloom, but I personally see an opportunity here. Because plastic pollution is tied in with carbon emissions, it also means that solving plastic pollution can lead to a decrease in carbon emissions. Still, plastic pollution isn't just an aesthetic issue. It's not just about how the oceans look. It is also a major health issue. 1 in 3 fish caught for human consumption now contains plastic. And in seawater, plastic absorbs chemicals which have been linked to endocrine disruption and even some types of cancer, becoming more powerful as they work their way up the food chain. Guess who's at the top of the food chain? We are. Now, we can't scoop it out of the sea because only 1% of marine litter floats. The vast majority of it sinks to the sea floor, and most of it is microscopic. So even if we invented something that would filter things out, most of these plastic pieces would just go right through. So the best answer is to stop using plastic. It's also very important not to demonize plastic. All right, I use plastic personally for many things. All right, my prescription medication comes in plastic bottles. My deodorant comes in plastic bottles. The hand sanitizer that I've been using quite frequently lately is in a plastic container. Plastic has done a lot for us because it is so versatile. And I don't want anyone to walk away from this talk feeling guilty for using plastic. All right, bottom line, we use plastic because it was extremely effective. And for a long time, we didn't know how bad it was. And even now, even knowing that it is bad for the environment, it is still very, very useful. Diabetics use it for their disposable syringes, helping stay healthy, staying alive. Arthritic patients have it for their replaced hips. Construction workers wear it to protect their heads. Plastics made space travel possible, and all the scientific discoveries that we've made in space. Plastic has also lightened cars and jets, which has saved fuel and pollution, which can seem counterintuitive, but if you need less energy to move this big, bulky vehicle, you're ultimately burning less fuel, which contributes to pollution reduction. It's also used for clean drinking water. So anytime that we've had our water go out or it's unavailable to us and we pop open a plastic water bottle, that is a time where plastic has done something really incredibly useful for us. So how do we stop plastic? Well, in addition to using less plastic on our own, reusing, recycling, repairing, and repurposing, we can also encourage our politicians to put a ban on plastic bags. Bans on plastic bags have already proven to be extremely effective. So for example, in the United Kingdom, the introduction of a 5-pound plastic bag charge introduced in 2015 has brought about a reduction of 83% in plastic bag use. Now, they still produce 1.3 billion plastic bags per year, but an 83% reduction is huge. In the last 5 years, that is a big, big change. And their first landmark step was to eliminate plastic microbeads, which can no longer be used in rinse-off cosmetic products such as body scrubs, face washes, toothpaste, and cleaning products. So on the individual level, we can take our own reusable bags to the store, and we can personally not buy these microbead products. We can also talk to our government about banning them at the local level, the state level, or the national level. So for example, to give you, my family and I, we shop at this store called Aldi's a lot. Aldi's has no plastic bags whatsoever. You have to bring your own bags. So if my family goes to Aldi's and we fill up, let's say, 5 bags worth of groceries in our reusable bags, we have saved 5 plastic bags from going into the environment. Next week, it brings it up to a total of 10. The week after that, 15, and on and on and on. So anytime we use a reusable bag, we save plastic from going into the environment. And one of the things that I also bring up to people in politicians, because a lot of times they have questions about the economy. You know, plastic bags are very useful. And I remind them that if you're going to reuse a certain kind of bag a lot, you will also usually care about how that bag looks, the brand of it, the design of it, and somebody has to design that bag in a certain way, which means that somebody has a paying job to create a nice looking reusable bag. So you're not just reducing plastic pollution. In a way, you're also creating jobs. Zimbabwe also did a phenomenal job. In 2017, they announced a total ban on expanded polystyrene, which is a styrofoam-like material used for food containers that takes up to 1 million years to decompose. There's a picture of it in the corner. I still remember when I was a kid, I used to pick those things apart. I had no idea that they took so long to decompose, and it was just so much fun. You know, and this goes back to what I was saying about, you know, don't guilt yourself, don't feel bad about, you know, these sorts of things, because, you know, if you feel bad about plastic pollution, I'm going to feel bad about plastic pollution because I ripped up so many of those containers for fun. The best thing we can do is to immediately cut down our use of single-use plastics, substituting washable metal utensils and metal drinking containers for plastic water bottles, as well as advocating for single-use plastic bans in our local communities. Now, we at Unity Bay Area Houston are already doing a wonderful job of that. So if you think about when we normally get together and have lunch on Sundays, think of all the people who come, all the people who eat there. We use metal utensils and then we wash them afterwards. So think about how many people come, how many people use those utensils. All of those metal utensils used has saved plastic utensils from going into the environment. Now multiply that by the amount of times we've gathered, and that is a ton of plastic pollution saved. We are doing a phenomenal, phenomenal job. There are reasons for hope as well. Scientists have recently found that mealworms and waxworms can break down styrofoam into compost, and a newly discovered microbe can reduce the time plastic takes to degrade from a few hundred years to only a few days. Additionally, plant-based biodegradable plastics are being manufactured too. They're just as durable as regular plastics, but they break down much, much faster. There are a surprising number of creative solutions to plastic. So for example, I'm not much of a straw drinker, but I know that if I were to use a straw, that is plastic that doesn't degrade in the environment. But close to when I first started working at Unity Bay Area Houston, Kira gifted me these really cool bamboo straws. And I have been using that so much for iced coffee because it turns out I really do like drinking things through a straw. I just don't like to pollute because of it. So having a bamboo straw helps me contribute to the, solving the pollution problem while still enjoying the same benefits of a plastic straw. This is a picture of mealworms eating their way through styrofoam and turning it into compost, which I thought was really cool. The fact that something natural, a natural organism, already exists that can break down this unnatural substance. That said, I mean, we can't throw mealworms at everything, More reasons for hope. We have begun using ancient techniques to make natural plastics. So there's this ancient civilization from Mesoamerica that predates the Mayans. They're called the Olmecs. They are typically known for these giant carvings of human heads with these helmets on them. And they used to make natural plastic from rubber tree sap drippings, which they then sculpted into sports balls. Today, we are using this tree's natural drippings to create tires, mattresses, and all natural latex gloves. So here is a picture of somebody who has tapped one of these trees, creating all natural latex, which is really freaking cool. Okay, so what is our power to stop pollution? I'm going to go over the individual things we can do, the large-scale things we can do, perhaps most importantly, how to effectively talk to politicians, even ones that we disagree with, so that they will listen. So how to stop pollution on a small scale? We can reuse, recycle, repair, and repurpose, like those cute little piggy planters or the vertical wall, the vertical garden made of recycled plastic bottles. We can use metal or biodegradable utensils or bottles and bring our own bags to the grocery store. We can eat less red meat or cut it out of our diet completely if that's something that's feasible for us. We can compost our organic waste and reduce the methane emissions that come out of landfills. We can carpool when possible and use cruise control for long trips. We can turn off lights and fans when not using them. We can use LED lights instead of incandescents. We can switch to an electric car or a hybrid vehicle. And we can talk to other people about the benefits that we gain from doing this, whether health or economic or creativity, so that other people feel just as inspired and passionate as we do. Because I know if I go up to somebody and tell them about all the environmental damage they're doing, they're not going to like me very much. You know, you think that if you tell human beings they're doing something wrong, they'll feel bad and then try to fix it. But it turns out that's just not how we work. If you tell someone that they're doing something bad or wrong, you make them feel guilty, they usually just say, hey, screw you, you made me feel bad, now I like you and your opinion even less, I'm gonna go back to what I'm doing. So when you're sharing things like why you eat less red meat, share it passionately and without guilt. On the large scale, we can encourage our local government to ban or tax plastic bags and incentivize biodegradable alternatives appealing to economic reasons. So for example, the one I said I like to give is, you know, somebody's got to design these bags that people reuse, and that makes jobs. That gives somebody, you know, the task of designing these bags, so we're not losing out economically for the sake of the environment. We can boost our economy and save the environment at the same time. We can talk to legislators about banning microplastics, appealing to health and economic risks. We can talk to our legislators about closing fracking loopholes and barring it near residential areas, schools, and nature preserves. We can also consider joining an anti-fracking organization like Frack Dallas or Americans Against Fracking. We can support the Citizens Climate Lobby in their effort to put a carbon fee and dividend on carbon emissions. They are trying to push through the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act I mentioned earlier, and they have bipartisan legislation and a whole huge diverse community. I mean, it's everybody. It's everybody. I mean, you guys would feel right at home with them. I know you guys would. They have unity principles, whether they realize it or not. They got unity principles of, you know, non-judgment, non-blaming, inclusivity, tolerance, connection, authenticity. They're wonderful. We can also talk to members of Congress about passing laws requiring the latest technology to reduce methane emissions in ruminants. Okay, so how do we effectively talk to politicians? Start with sincere gratitude. There's a couple things to do with this that I want to touch on. The first bit is gratitude. Gratitude makes that when I'm grateful for somebody else, I feel good and I make them feel good. And when people feel good about themselves, they are more likely to listen to you. Now, that doesn't mean that we find something to appreciate about them that we really don't appreciate. But I promise you, Even the politicians you think have nothing redeeming about them, they support legislation that you might actually like. And I had no idea this would happen until somehow I got on a bunch of representatives and senators' mailing lists. And in between some of the thinly veiled political attacks against their opponents were a list of some of the bills they had created or co-sponsored that they were proud of. So they had handed me on a silver platter things that I might appreciate about them. So when you go in for a meeting with a politician, before you say, I want this thing, help me out, say, hey, listen, I heard about this bill you co-sponsored, this legislation you're trying to pass, and I just want to say I really, really appreciate that. That personally affects my life for such and such a reason. And right then, they feel more inclined to listen to you. I think of it almost like talking to tech support or somebody in customer service. Some people can be very, very nasty. And if you are the one person out of all the people who scream at them and tell them you're doing a terrible job, you're hurting your community, how dare you do this, that, the other, if you're the one person who says, hey man, I appreciate you. I like what you're doing. I see that you are not all bad. In unity terms, this is like saying, I behold the Christ in you. I see that you have inherent goodness in you. Suddenly, they open up and they want to talk to you. It's no longer a burden to meet with you. They're not as stressed anymore. Now they want to hear what you have to say. You can also study their online profiles to see what is personally important to them. And you can appeal to their values without compromising your own. That's really important because if a politician asks me what I care about, I am not going to lie and say I don't care about the environmental destruction or let's say the polar bears, right? But I also know that if they are more focused on the economy, I can appeal to the economy. If their focus is on American military power, I can tell them what the Pentagon says about climate change as one of the biggest threats to American military. I can approach it on their terms because the best way to change somebody's mind is to speak to their personal values. I can speak for days and days on days about what I like and what I love. But if I don't speak to their soul, they're not going to be as receptive to what I have to say. You also want to ask open-ended questions and then actively listen. So most people don't respond well to lecturing, but it's more than that. It's about getting them engaged. Imagine you have a full schedule for a day, right? And they agree to meet with you. You can talk at them, but they might be distracted, they might be tired, they might have a million other concerns that are pulling their attention away. But if you ask open-ended questions, they have to do more than just say yes and no. They have to think about it. And some of the times, because they've been attacked from all these different angles, this may very well be the first time they've ever thought about this. You know, maybe they haven't really thought too hard about climate change and pollution because every time they've heard about it, somebody is screaming at them and making them feel ashamed about it. So for example, instead of saying, do you believe in climate change? They could say, yes, no, you could say, what are your thoughts on climate change? And they might say, well, I think it's a Chinese hoax, which is not true, but that gives you a direction to go in. Well, okay, tell me more about that. What about it do you think is a hoax? And they'll tell you, and you listen to them and, actively listen. Don't just nod your head and all that. And then you can say, okay, well, sir, would you mind, giving them the power to say yes or no, would you mind, or how would you feel if I dropped off some information that might show you the economic benefits of fighting climate change? And they go, okay, you can drop that off. And now what that does is something very important. See, I learned this thing recently. I'm not sure why I never learned it before, but people, when it comes to changing their mind, a lot of the times they don't change it in person in the discussion that they're having with you. They change their mind later. I don't know the exact reason for this. I suspect it's something to do with the ego, and I don't mean that in a judgmental way. Like when people are speaking to others they feel like they have to represent their values and principles that they've stuck with up until this point. But when they're alone, they can start to look at this in the safety of their homes and the safety of their privacy and go, you know what? Maybe he's got a point here. Maybe she's got a point here. Maybe they're right. Can you tell me more about that? And ultimately, talking to politicians is about establishing ongoing relationships, which is why it's so important to establish good rapport with their staff. They are the gatekeepers. I remember when I first started lobbying Congress for climate change legislation, I felt like a failure whenever I didn't reach the politician, because I thought to myself, in order to enact change, I have to get the politician up here, and the staff are down here. So if I only reach here, I haven't gone as high as I need to go, therefore I failed. And that is completely not true, because Congress, members of Congress, their staff are a lot like the staff at Unity, like me. So if you come up to me and say, hey, where's Kira? I'd like to talk to her. And I say, oh, well, she's in a meeting right now. She can't talk, but I can take a message and I'll pass it on. The staff for politicians do the exact same thing. In fact, politicians also kind of remind me of overworked college students. And half the time, they're like, wait a minute, what? We had a project due? We had a project, we had homework? Wait, what bill is on the floor of the House today? What? I haven't heard about that. So essentially, you can think of it like establishing good rapport with your staff is like bringing it into the consciousness of the member of Congress themselves. It puts it on their radar, and if you establish a really good relationship, it puts it as a priority. We have sat down with people who have been incredibly resistant to talk of climate change. We have sat down with people who a couple of years ago did not want to hear about climate change, who knew as sure as the sun will rise in the east and set in the west, that climate change was not real. And now, because we've established good relationships with their staff, they are changing their minds. Because, when somebody whose opinion you trust and respect changes their mind, it makes you reconsider your own stance. So they like and trust their staff, and when you can change their staff's mind, you can ultimately change their mind too. Okay, pollution harms everything on the planet, including us. Now, I don't want to say that we haven't made any progress, because we have made a ton of progress so far. There's still work to do, but we have made a ton of progress. Just think back to 20 years ago, 40 years ago. How often did climate change come up in everyday conversations? How much did it come up in political debates? Right now, we are talking about climate change more than ever before. It is entering into the consciousness of the entire world. And when people are aware of something, they then have the power to fix it. The problem at times may seem overwhelming, but I promise we have the power to fix it, both with small-scale adjustments to our lifestyles and large-scale strategic meetings with our governments. Pollution is a problem, but it is also a challenge, and is one that we, as intelligent, compassionate human beings, are uniquely suited to solve the world over. And I hope that with these strategies, you will help me to fix pollution. Thank you. These are my sources. Boop, boop, boop. Okay. Thank you. If y'all have questions, I will take some questions.
I have a comment, Ryan. I think during this COVID thing, there's been a kind of a drift back to using the plastic bags rather than taking your own to the grocery store.
Yeah, and I'll admit I'm also guilty of that. I also think, one of the reasons why I brought up Aldi's is because, they when I'm forced to not use plastic bags, I find it remarkably easy. Other than that, it's just gotten to the point where it's like a habit for me. Like if the trash can in my room has a plastic bag in there, so the the plastic itself doesn't get mussed up. I'm hoping when all this is over, we will be able to transition to reusable bags. But I don't know. I think part of it is also because, everything, a lot of, when it comes to contaminated substances, people feel much more safe throwing things out. Like, man, that's done. Okay, get it away from me. Where if it's reusable, then people might think like, oh, what if the virus is still on there? So I don't know. I'll have to look into. I'm curious how the UK is doing. I know they've handled the COVID thing a lot better than America has, but I know they've also reduced their plastic bag usage. So I'm interested in seeing how during this time, if they've regressed a little bit or if they're still sticking with it. I don't know. But yeah,
I ordered some reusable bags that actually fold over the edge of the grocery cart. So I just put them right into that. And I love going to Aldi's because when I put them back up on the conveyor belt, and then they put them right back into the green bag that's hanging on both sides of the cart. And then I can put them in my car and they're great. They don't jostle I don't end up with groceries all over my trunk of the car. So they're wonderful. And they're reusable. I really like them.
Awesome.
So I can use them around just walk through the store and put them right in the bag. And then one of the other stores that has where you can do your own, they have that wand that you carry around and price everything. You put them in the bag and then they go. I think I want to say Safeway, but it's not Safeway. But anyway, one of the stores has those. I don't think they're using them right now, but they're really good. I mean, these bags would be perfect for that because then once you put it in the bag, you don't even have to take it out again.
Yeah, I'll have to check those out. I know right now my family, when we go to Aldi's, we use these these insulated bags. So if we have something that needs refrigeration, it'll stay colder for longer.
Yeah, I've got that too. Yeah, those are cool. Anyway.
Yeah, thank you.
I was going to say too, another thing that we've done lately, that I've been doing lately at Aldi's is I just keep 2 of their large carton flats in the trunk of the car. I take the wagon to the car, just put them directly in that. So, I don't have to worry about the reusable bags getting contaminated. It saves on plastic and the environment. I have a question.
Sure.
Does methane serve any kind of positive function for the environment since it seems to be so prevalent?
I think what it is, I don't know. I'm sure there's something that naturally feeds off it. I think it's more just naturally, if it wasn't for human agriculture and fracking and things like that, it would come up at a rate that is, taken care of by the environment. So I did a calculation a while ago, about how many cattle exist in the world. If I remember correctly, it's enough for every single person to own 5 cows. 7-something billion people can own 5 cows. That's how many cattle exist in the world. So we are way over, the natural methane limits. But yeah, and I've made some personal it's been hard, but over the last couple months, normally I would only get exclusively a beef burrito. Then I mixed it up with chicken and fish and things like that. So I'm trying to reduce my red meat intake. And one of the things that I didn't mention earlier, but I'll mention about agriculture is I read an article about the statistics of people who are eating the Impossible Burger. And it's not vegans and vegetarians because it's theorized that they've already become used to non-meat options. So the main demographic of people who are eating this meatless meat are people who are omnivores and people who are seeking to reduce their methane footprint in the environment, which means that we are getting additional people who wouldn't normally be reducing their meat intake to reduce their red meat intake. And that gives me a lot of hope too, because if it was only people who already didn't eat meat, that would be good, but it wouldn't be a positive increase of those who are going meatless. So what we see is a lot of people are like, hey, this meatless stuff is really good. And as the price comes down, more people are probably going to do it. Any other questions? All right.
I actually had a question. I don't know if you know about this, but wasn't there a fracking project in League City somewhere that was meeting with some resistance? There was some sort of drilling, or and I don't know if it was an oil well being drilled or if it was fracking. It might have just been an oil well.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. I can't speak to that. But I'll look it up after this. Because I'm curious. That's something that I want to talk to.
There was, Mary Helen, when I lived over in Brittany Lakes, they did try to start some drilling over there kind of in a neighborhood area that everybody threw a fit about, and they were able to stop it. But I think there were several areas in town that they tried to do that.
That might be what I'm thinking about, and I didn't know the outcome. Because you got to stay on it, because just because you win once doesn't mean you win forever.
Oh, yeah.
Right. As we know.
Good point.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming tonight. I appreciate you being here. If you liked it, consider giving a love offering. And I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful night. I hope you learn things that you can take into your personal life and into your communities. Thank you, and have a wonderful.
Thank you, Ryan. Great job. Blessings, everybody.